This is the Skin Science Podcast. I'm Dr. Thomas Hitchcock, and here we'll investigate everything skin science and dissect it from a scientific perspective, analyze it from a medical perspective, critique it from a consumer perspective, and give insight from an industry perspective. Welcome back to the podcast. I'm Dr. Thomas Hitchcock, and I am joined today by Angela McDonald. She is back from all of her excursions.
Good, bad, or otherwise.
Yeah, you were just in Barcelona.
I was. Wonderful vacation with the kiddos.
Mm-hmm. Normally it's a boondoggle, which is a word that, I'm just kidding. It's the word Angela taught me.
Working very hard overseas, but this was just for fun.
She knows that the boss is going to see this.
This is true.
But we're also joined by Dr. Brian Jones.
Who has not been in Spain.
Who probably would love to be. But is familiar with
boondoggles.
Yeah.
That's true. All right.
All right, so Dr. Jones, anything exciting happening lately with you?
No, not that I can recall. I got my son back from Europe. He got stuck, so I guess he had some issues towards, but no, everything else has been pretty good.
Was he in Spain?
No, he was in all through Brussels and Paris, and then got stuck at some music festival and got sick.
Well, to get stuck, music festival would be a good place to be.
That's true, but then he's probably really tired afterwards. Anyway, we're joined in the back of the room by our peanut gallery. I should probably stop referring to them as that, but yes. We got Jose Maldonado, Dr. Maldonado, who is our producer, works with us in medical affairs. And then we've got Seti and Alan, who are the production team at Media World here in Dallas, Texas. So as I promised a couple of episodes ago, I wanted to start out our podcast with one of my kind of hobbies and passions. I brought another one of my puzzles, and this one is also by the same designer as last time. It's by Tyler Williams at Beard's Wood Company. And this one is called the Idiot Box, which is what my dad used to call the TV when I was growing up. And you may not appreciate it through the camera, but in person, the woods that he uses is pretty extraordinary. He uses different types of woods, and it's quite beautiful. I haven't actually had time to sit down and to solve this yet, but I wanted to share that with you on the podcast, and I probably will make a video of me solving it and putting it on my website, dochitchcock.com, if you're interested at all in puzzles, which I am, and that's enough of that. Let's get into...
But it will be time-lapsed.
It will be time-lapsed.
How long will it take you to finish that, Thomas?
Some of these take me a few hours, and so I do cut and make and speed up parts and stuff.
Yeah, I don't know. We'd be entertained for a few hours.
Well,
talk about the Idiot Box.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you, there's actually, the reason I got even into puzzles is because I started watching videos of people solving puzzles, and I was so enthralled by watching people solve the process of actually solving a puzzle.
Thinking through it.
And I decided I had to have these puzzles myself and to do it myself. And so now that I'm doing it, I kind of want to do the same for other people, which is like show them the thought process, because these are not cheap. This one costs, I think, over $400. Mm-hmm. And so some of these are expensive, and not everybody can afford the luxury of, these novelties. And so I think some people find pleasure in watching other people's
think it through, and thinking
and
along with you,
and talk to the TV like, you should do this or this. And I've seen people leave comments like, you should use this part of it to open this part. And it's actually kind of there's a little like a group of people that have like collaborations and stuff. It's actually like a little community.
Very nice.
So
well,
so it's
a
a hobby.
Us on puzzle boxes.
Yeah, and I'm going to bring one every time.
Yay! We can't wait. We can hardly wait.
Okay, that's what we call sarcasm. Mm-hmm. All right, so let's get on to the topic of today's podcast, which is something that our listeners are probably very familiar with.
I would say so.
And that is collagen. So collagen is a word that is like, when I hear it in marketing, it's like scratching nails down a chalkboard to me because of the reasons we're going to talk about today.
Yep.
And part of that is because there's so much kind of marketing-driven misinformation that you find in advertisements, in even in scientific talks at times, that leads people to such confusion about what collagen is, how it's made by the body, whether you can use it as a supplement, those different things, those different areas of information. And so I'd be curious to hear from both Dr. Jones and yourself what you think of when you hear collagen, because for me, you guys know that I react that way, especially when I hear people say things like it helps make new fresh collagen. And we've mentioned stuff like that before in the podcast. But what do you think,
boy,
Angela?
I've had that conversation with you so many times. Well,
I'm sure I biased you slightly.
Again, because I haven't been here in a while, I come from both the consumer perspective, because I'm the target demographic for such products that would target collagen, because I'm just now getting to that aging process. I'm just now, don't laugh.
In 5 or so years.
Stepping into that arena.
Yeah.
So, but I'm also industry. So what I know of collagen, I know from the devices that we sell in particular, and that is that collagen's a protein in the skin. And the dermal layer of the skin that that declines, that we lose, that degrades as we age, and when it does, it results in fine lines and wrinkles. And so in our industry in particular, what we're always looking for are ways in which to increase collagen to fight the aging process. And I have to admit, when I walk through the store and I see supplements that say collagen, or drinks that say collagen, or I'm often perplexed myself, knowing what I know from our industry. It's like, how could that possibly be? So this is a really fun topic for me to dive into and hear more from a scientist perspective. Is it truth or is it not?
Or is it some of both, right?
Some of both, yeah.
Yeah, and so what do you think, Brian, when you hear the word collagen in any context, and you can use different contexts, what do you think? What's your reaction?
Well, again, if you go back to the history as far as how it was named, I think it's for kala is glue, I believe, and gen is generation or to produce. So it's producing glue, I guess, is how it was originally thought to hold the skin together or hold the tissues together. I guess when you think about it, also going along the history, is that really it produced a lot of data and a lot of knowledge regarding biology and chemistry as well. There was, I don't know if you know, but there was 3 Nobel Prizes that were given out based on work on collagen.
No, I did not know that.
So, yeah. So Linus Pauling, big guy in vitamin C, he received it. Ramachandran received one. And Francis Crick, as towards Watson and Crick, as towards DNA helixes also.
What years were those? Do you recall, Brian?
Early or late 40s, early 50s.
Okay.
When you were in elementary school.
Very funny. Very funny. Everybody knows that's not the truth.
That's not the truth. That's when your grandmother was in elementary school. So yes, that's very interesting, Brian. I didn't know that all 3 of those had won Nobel Prizes based on that.
Well, Linus Pauling got his in chemistry, and then Ramachandran got his actually on collagen and the helix structure, and then Francis Crick, he didn't. I mean, he did his work on helix structure and as well. So again, there's.
So I guess that kind of, just for the listeners at home, helix structure, and so when we think of DNA, everybody knows kind of just from common knowledge that DNA has like this helical structure. Yeah. You see it in movies when they portray DNA.
The triple helix.
The double helix versus.
Yeah. Well, double helix for DNA.
For DNA, and then the triple helix for collagen.
Correct.
And so collagen's made up of several subunits depending on the type of collagen, and so there's a helical structure as well, and then there's substructures and
correct.
Such.
So I know we're getting probably faster into this, more
We
detailed
really
than what you care about.
This is fine. This is fine. And so I think, but that's kind of where. So the vitamin C that you mentioned, I'm assuming it's due to the production of collagen via vitamin C.
Correct. And Linus Pauling was really big into that. He took huge doses. He said it was the anti-aging
Didn't know he was just peeing it out.
So he would take, I believe, like 30,000.
That's a lot.
Yeah, units a day. I mean, just a huge number.
Wow.
He lived pretty old, but he didn't live forever. So.
And how did he look is the question.
Well, he got old.
Looked his age?
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's the thing is, a lot of people they think there's some sort of magic button, right? And so vitamin C, we know, is a water-soluble vitamin that if you take a lot, you're just going to urinate most of it out. You're going to pee it right out. And so the question has been, can you take too much vitamin C? What's kind of, should you saturate your body because then you hit your kind of most that you can have? And so there's been some studies on whether there's deleterious effects of vitamin C, whether onto your kidneys, because that has to filter that out to urinate it, things of that nature. But also just the premise of there is no one substance known that you take it and it just fixes everything else, right? So there are genes that are associated with aging and such that we know that if you upregulate them, they're associated with maybe more collagen or better skin or longer life. But the fact is that scientists a lot of times do these types of studies in isolation, and they're looking at one or two variables, and there's a whole slew of variables that make our bodies function. And so you can't just change one thing and everything fall into place, because when you're younger, you metabolize things different than when you're older. And so although you might get some benefit both ways, younger or older, it doesn't mean that when you're older, you're going to have as much benefit or the same type of benefit. And it doesn't mean it's going to stop you from aging. It doesn't mean it's not healthy. It means keep taking it, but it's not like you kind of ingest said, well, how did he look? The fact is, he, to Brian's point, probably still looked old, but he may have looked better for his age than he would have.
Yeah.
You don't know,
Fair
because you're only one person. You can't split yourself into two, study one that doesn't take collagen and one that does.
Well, and there's all those other factors, which I know you're about to get into as we talk about collagen. It's like, what else was he doing? And some of the things he was doing might have been deleterious to collagen.
That's
so
right.
he might have
Did he
been
go in the
negating
sun,
some of the benefit of, and back in that day and age, they didn't have the information that they have now on aging, right? So you're right. Might have been excessive sun exposure, not understanding at that time exactly what that was doing to the aging process.
Yeah, and it's multifactorial, and so you want to make sure you're addressing different aspects of either aging or disease in order to truly get a benefit. And so back to the vitamin C, though, interestingly, I first kind of was introduced to the concept of connective tissue being tied to vitamin C when I was doing my postdoctorate, and you've heard this story several times, because I did my postdoctorate in tissue engineering. And so what we were doing in the lab, and this was at Yale under Dr. Laura Nicholson, who's one of the world kind of leaders in cardiovascular tissue engineering. She also has a company now. But we were attempting to make small diameter blood vessels. And so they had in the past been able to they would isolate smooth muscles, and they were able to make large diameter blood vessels, but not small diameter blood vessels. And one of the things you have to be cognizant of when you're trying to make a tissue is that you have to have the robustness in order so that for instance, a blood vessel, you have pressure from the fluid going through, and if it's not completely sealed, it will explode or leak, and so you'll have an aneurysm, and the animal that you implanted into will die, whether it's an animal or a human. So in order to properly do it, you have to make sure it has, because you're taking cells and you're putting it onto a scaffold, and then those cells populate the scaffold, and then they produce all these extracellular proteins, which to those who are not familiar with the jargon are the proteins and sugars and other things that make the scaffold in which the cells live. And so in the dermis, we know that the dermis of our skin is made up of mostly scaffolding. Mostly it's tissue that is not living. It is deposited there to be the house or the structure, so like the scaffolding of a building. And there are cells, live cells in there, like immune cells and fibroblasts that make the structure. But overall, like the epidermis is very densely packed with cells, not as much structure, and then the dermis is mostly structure. And so for a blood vessel, you have to have that structure as well as the cells, because you have to be able to keep that blood in, that high pressure blood in. And so what we found, or what they knew already, was that in order for you to produce collagen, or to have those cells produce collagen, the growth media had to have both copper and vitamin C, because copper is a catalyst for the enzymes that make the collagen, and then the vitamin C as well is required for that. And so I knew that if you forgot to put one of those in, the cells would just fall off the scaffold and just go to the bottom of the bioreactor and just sit there, and they'd still live, but they wouldn't function to make extracellular matrix.
Yeah. For the maturation, correct?
That's correct, yeah. And so, the other thing was, and as far as age, just to kind of finish out this story, is that we also, what we were doing was trying to find out ways in which we could go into an operating room. People who were having surgery for like a bypass or something for their heart, if they had a heart attack or something, had a clog there, can we grow them another vessel so that we can have something ready for them to do the bypass. Because at the time, you'd have to go get the saphenous vein, so they'd have a huge gash on their leg, as well as having the open heart surgery. And so the thought was, can you make it easier for a patient to have kind of an off-the-shelf type of vessel? And so the problem is, most of the people having heart attacks are not young people. And so we would harvest these saphenous veins from older people, and then we'd scrape off the smooth muscle cells and try to grow the arteries. And what we would find is that when you're older, you just don't secrete enough collagen to make a viable artery. So I had to do some gene therapy to make them young again, et cetera, and we won't get into all that. But the point there is that we added vitamin C and copper, just like we were required to, but the older people's cells simply were not genetically able to produce enough of the collagen to compensate for the age of the cell, the genetic age of the cell. When I was able to genetically reverse the age, it was then able to produce younger, and we were able to make a robust vessel and implant it into an animal. And I believe we were the first to be able to do that, and it's published in the literature. So,
well, can you genetically reverse my age?
That's another podcast. So we
Let's
did
do that one.
We did talk a little bit about that a few podcasts ago about senolytics and being able to do that, and that is something that I'm currently researching, and interested in. But for today's purposes of talking about collagen, I do want to bring it down to what is collagen? How does our body produce collagen? What are the forms of collagen? And when people talk about collagen, you don't really hear it used in a specific term. They say collagen as if in all collagen being the same.
It's the same, right?
Right. You don't hear them saying the good collagen or the bad collagen or the scar collagen or the healthy collagen. You do in certain places or in certain wheelhouses. What's the word? So I guess let's start with that. Let's start with what is collagen. We talked about the structural form of collagen, right? So you have anything to add to that before we move on past that?
No, we can keep going.
Okay.
I know we've already kind of went into that in pretty good detail. So.
Okay. And so I guess what we should probably now touch on is that there are many forms of collagen. And so a lot of times people have enough, especially in our industry, they have enough education either via, hearing their colleagues say it or, formal education to know things like growth factors. And they'll hear something like EGF or FGF, which are two different types of growth factors that humans create. But what they don't realize is that the human body and human genetics are way more complicated than a lot of them know. There's reasons why people get doctorates in genetics, because even a person that's a doctor of genetics doesn't know everything about genetics. They have to, simplify. They have to stick to a very small
in one area.
Yeah,
right?
exactly. And so, somebody who's a clinical geneticist may not be a molecular geneticist. And there's plant genetics, there's human genetics, there's bacterial genetics or microbial genetics, and even within those fields, there's niches. And one of the things you learn when you're coming up through the basic sciences, and especially when you're in grad school and such, is that even the same genes in the same person can have different forms at the end product, because there's something called splice variants. And what that means is basically like the old film days, where they would take the film from a canister and to edit it. Now we do it on computers, but they used to edit it by actually cutting the film and taking out the part that they didn't want. And that's where you hear when it ended up on the cutting room floor. That's what that comes from, because they would cut that piece of film out and then drop it on the floor and then tape those two pieces together. And that's splicing that film back together. And that is exactly what happens in our bodies all the time, is that we can have a gene, and the body, depending on the need or the situation, can actually take the RNA that makes the protein, and it can slice out different. We have exons. I'm getting too granular there. So we have different parts that the body can choose which ones to take out and keep in. And so they call those splice variants. So you can actually use the same gene and upregulate the same gene, but have different end
effects.
proteins
Okay.
based on the splice variant.
Well, my actual doctor was in part of that is towards the splice sites and looking at mutations at the splice sites leading towards cancer.
Interesting.
So it's kind of interesting. Not going to get into details of that, but again, a lot of the cancers are actually because of splice variants as towards mutation at that point where they no longer splice at that point and make a longer non-functional protein.
So they're longer than they should be, so they
Correct.
don't fold correctly.
Correct.
Yeah, and that's the other thing is that a lot of people haven't been trained up through molecular biology don't when they hear the word protein. What do you think when you hear the word protein? Like, if you visualize what a protein looks like, what do you think
I
it
think
looks
of
like?
fibers. I think of I think of connective tissue almost like fibers of something that is either providing a scaffolding, like a scaffolding type of
Okay.
look. Or I think of even connective tissues, like when you think of scars and the connective tissues are kind of weighing down the skin to produce a scar. I think that's what I visualize. Right or wrong, that's what...
Well, it's not wrong. It's
what I
right
visualize.
and it's right and wrong because there are different forms that proteins can take. And so connective tissues like collagen and such, they can be very fibrous in the way that they're created. But a lot of proteins, especially things like enzymes, they come out in a string because it's an amino acid sequence. And then the body folds them into a certain configuration, and it's super important to fold them the right way because we have certain domains that are active domains. Those are the domains that actually do the work or bind to something. And then you have other domains that are more structural in nature. And what he's talking about is that if you change the way that a protein or a RNA piece of your genetics is transcribed and you change a splice variant or something of that nature, you end up with a longer protein than you're supposed to, and then it can't fold it correctly. And so
That's where you get the mutations, and that can lead to
well, it
things.
leads to a non-functional protein sometimes. And if a protein can function, then you have a syndrome of some sort or a disease of some sort. Or you can truncate it too short, and then it can't fit in the right place, or it's overactive because the maybe the active motif is exposed, so it's interacting with too many things. So this is one of the things that when people hear when they talk about proteins and growth factors and even collagen, I don't think people or appreciate, because nor should they have a reason to, the nuances of those things that drive the importance of genetics as well as other functions of the body. And that's why we were talking about with vitamin C. It's the same with what we're going to talk about in a few minutes, which is trying to take a collagen supplement and knowing that just taking one thing can be used by the body in many ways, depending on a lot of other variables. Like, are you going into the sun for the vitamin C, or or is your diet crap? Are you eating a lot of sugar?
Who would do that? Right. Who would do that?
No, I
can't imagine.
I have a horrible sweet tooth. But anyway, so Brian, tell us how many forms. Well, actually, we already talked about it, so I'm not going to ask you to guess. How many forms of collagen are there in the body? Is it more than 5?
Yes.
Is it more than 10?
Yes.
Is it more than 20?
Yes.
Is it more than 100?
Not that we know of.
Okay. That's a really
Not that
great
we know
answer.
Of. Okay.
How many do we know of?
I believe it's 27 or 28 at this point in time.
I believe it's 28. And so of those, is there any categories that you would put them into? Because, people might kind of be thinking, oh, heck, there's 28 different, at least, types of collagen. What does that even mean? Like, are they all found in humans? Are these found? Where are these found?
Well, I guess, the 27 or 28 are found in humans, but they're found in different parts of the body and have totally different functions depending on what they're trying to do. So it can go from anywhere from, connecting two different types of tissues together. It could be cushioning, essentially joints. It could be, also within the tissue or within the cell as towards providing structure and also leading, there's neuronal collagen that actually helps in regarding formation of neuronal tissues, along with skin and the like. So again, there's a lot of specialization that comes along with these different collagens. There's about half a dozen that are found in human skin, but they're found in different locations, and they, again, have different functions.
Right, and we'll talk about some of those functions in a bit, but one of the things that I think we should talk about is the differences that consumers and people that are not scientists may not appreciate between animal collagens and human collagens. or just animal proteins and human proteins in general, because we always are looking at publications where they'll do animal research or research on animal cells or something of that nature, and we can draw some conclusions. But if I'm to tell you, for instance, that certain collagen is super important, or does something in an animal, and I give you that's a publication in Nature or some high-end journal, and I tell you that, Angela, what's your response? Do you believe it? Do you think I need to go out and buy that collagen and eat it? Like, what's the response you get?
Say the question again.
So if I give you a publication where, let's say, they find that in a mouse, collagen, 3 is super important when they feed the mouse collagen 3 from their own genetics. So they make the genetics from the mouse and they put it into somewhere to isolate that particular protein, and they feed it to the mouse, that the mouse lives twice as long. What is in your mind, what does that translate to as a consumer if that's put across the news, that mice live twice as long if they eat their own collagen 3 protein?
And is it suggesting that we would also ingest mouse protein, or is it just suggesting that?
But that's the question for you, is how would the consumer, because of course there'll be a physician or somebody on the news that would probably give their blurb about what they think that means.
I would say that if I heard that, I would say, well, how do I get that collagen 3? If that's the case, if those mice are living longer and looking younger longer, then how would I get that? And that I would be left with a question mark. So then I would probably step out into the market and try to find ways that I could also have access to that collagen. Not necessarily for mice, but collagen 3 or whatever type of collagen that they were reporting in that.
So you're saying that collagen 3 is collagen 3 is collagen 3, whether it's mice, aardvark, human?
Potentially, but I don't think you can, in my mind, you can't cross species. So I would think I would be looking for something that could create that same effect in me that was created through
I'm talking about
that
to
mouse
ingest
collagen.
it.
To ingest it.
Yeah, so because you can eat mouse collagen or you can eat like cow collagen.
Well, the truth is we eat animal proteins. We drink animal proteins.
Right.
And we do increase muscle, for instance, when we take in protein. So those proteins do have an effect on our body. So yeah, maybe it would be. I would just be looking for some type of collagen 3, and I would be looking at the different sources and opportunities.
You say, like, if the steak is rich in collagen 3, I'm going to look for the steak and start eating the steak.
Yeah, I think that's if I didn't know better, I think that's the mindset that I would go with.
Okay,
yes.
Brian, what do you think?
I think.
Well, he knows better.
Well, that's why I'm asking him.
Well, again, it may be collagen 3, but there may be slight variations as towards between different species to species as towards the actual structure and the protein sequences.
And what does that mean for like the general layman?
Well, again, if you're just talking about diet where it gets digested and gets broken down to individual peptides or single peptides or combinations of peptides, it no longer means anything whatsoever. It all becomes no different between, the source. But if you're trying to find something that is a longer version or a longer protein, then you're not getting it through food sources. So again,
meaning you can't digest a large protein; it has to be broken down to the building blocks.
Correct, or smaller small blocks,
pieces.
Yeah.
So just for those who may not know, again, the jargon. When we talk about proteins, it's going to be that complex amino acid structure that's folded, and so that's what we consider a protein. When you get to now there are certain proteins that are very small. There are certain ones that are very large. When you think of a protein, you might think of the same image, but the fact is there's an array of sizes. There's huge proteins and very small proteins. But once you get to a certain size of amino acids, a certain number of amino acids on a certain sequence or string, then we just call them peptides. And so if you've ever heard of a peptide serum or something, it's because it's too small to be considered a protein, but the same building blocks.
But it's the same.
And then amino acids is the building block. So each amino acid, there's amino acids that actually the DNA translates into, and then the sequence of amino acids make the overall protein. They have different properties that can attract or repulse certain things, and that's why certain proteins can do certain things because of the sequence of their amino acids. So a peptide is just a smaller version of a protein.
Okay.
So with what Brian said, that is absolutely correct. And a prime example of the fact that a collagen 3 is not a collagen 3, or a human collagen is not a mouse collagen, or is not a cow collagen, is a dermal filler called Belafil, used to be called Artifil, and before that Articol, actually is in bovine collagen, because originally a lot of fillers were trying to be collagen.
Yeah.
And so the problem with collagen is, although a lot of people liked kind of the feel and the way it extruded and stuff or went through the needle, they didn't like the fact that people have allergic reactions, because some people are allergic to foreign molecules or foreign proteins. And so people would actually have adverse reactions to it because it was cow collagen. And so then they had to go and get allergy tests before they would get injected, and it became very cumbersome. And so that company still sells that product, and they probably would like to change it, but they've got like 5-year clinical studies that they've invested millions of dollars into, and so they keep it as is. However, that's just an example. But what the audience should know is that in science, a lot of times when you do animal studies, the findings will translate into a human, meaning if we find that, let's say, FGF, one of those growth factors, actually causes a certain thing to happen in a mouse model, it's likely, a lot of times it can translate to the human. You also see similar stuff in human cell models, but it doesn't as much go in the opposite direction. So I can take in, okay, I said that incorrectly.
Yeah, it goes the other way around.
Yeah. So you can take a human's FGF and put it into a mouse, and it would work.
Usually.
But you can't take the mouse and put it into the human model, and it would work.
Okay.
And so that's where sometimes it breaks down slightly, because we don't understand there's small nuances. And when we talk about collagen, I wanted to say all that because I want to talk about the fact that we don't typically go out and find human collagen sources. Like we're not ingesting
We're not
other.
cannibalizing anybody anytime soon.
Right.
We're using it as a source.
Now
Unless
that's
we're soy like green or something like that. But,
yeah,
okay.
And it's not to say that there's a lot of like synthetic biology happening where someday somebody might make like a yeast that produces human collagen. The question is there enough benefit to collagen supplementation to make it worthwhile? Now for a filler, maybe. Because it might be better.
Well, they're also trying to do that now, for individuals who are vegetarians, as far as being able to put that into plants. So trying to make human collagen so that they're able to ingest it, so that they're able to have collagen in their diet without breaking their vegan, whatever, it's just, philosophy, I guess.
Or principles.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's move on to collagen as far as supplementation. So, I mean, what do you think? Should we first talk more about how it works in the body?
Let's talk about. I think we have a basic collagen definition, or do we want to just get everybody on the same page and agree on a basic collagen definition, and then what degrades collagen? That's something we haven't talked about yet either, and then go into what could potentially change collagen.
Okay.
How about that?
Sure. So I think we've defined collagen.
Okay.
Now it's a structural protein, meaning, typically collagen is not, there's different proteins. Some are enzymes that cause, reactions of sorts. Collagen is not typically reactive in the sense that it causes a reaction to occur. It's typically a structural protein. And we've kind of covered that with, in the skin, it's structural in the sense that it makes up the bulk, the strength, of the dermis. So the skin's strength and structure comes from collagen.
Okay.
We have other things like elastin that gives it more stretch or bounce back. We have things like hyaluronic acid that gives it, it's not moisture.
Well, hydration.
Hydration.
Glycosaminoglycan, yeah.
Yep. And we have other glycosaminoglycans as well. It's not just hyaluronic acid, even though that's the most famous because of skincare. But
we may want to talk about that a little later on as well.
Okay.
But anyway,
all right.
We'll keep on collagen first.
Yeah. So when we think about the structure of collagen in the dermis, though, if we stick to just skin, he mentioned that there's a few types in just the skin, but there's also types in the rest of the body that bind the rest of our connective tissues as well. So, for instance, the tendons and the ligaments that hold our bones and our muscles to our bones together. Are very fibrous, collagenous and fibrous from different types of collagen. We don't just have collagen in our skin. We also have collagen that ties our skin down to the bones of our face and to other parts of our body. So there's actually legitimately filamentous or little anchors like of different parts of our skin to different parts of our skeleton, as well as to the muscle. We have fascia, what they call fascia, above and below muscles that coats the muscle and attaches muscles to muscles and muscles to skin and other things to kind of keep things in the right place. And so if you ever watch a surgery, you can watch a physician or a surgeon do like what they call blunt dissection, where they can actually, without cutting, push apart different things because they're actually taking the collagen and just forcefully separating it. And hoping that once they put it all back together in the right place, hopefully, that the fibrosis, which is what we hear, which is scar tissue formation, will actually adhere those things back together. So, and I guess I should step back a little bit and think, is fibrosis always in a description of scar tissue, or is fibrosis also describing just collagen formation through, for instance, if you get an injury, you're going to create collagen, then it's not necessarily scar tissue. Is that still fibrosis?
Well, if you have like an osteocyte or something like that, that would be more towards bone.
Yeah.
And they actually can produce collagen as well. And if they overproduce it as towards an injury towards a bone, would that be
fibrosis?
That'd be fibrosis.
That's a good point. So I guess that's where typically when we hear the word fibrosis, we think of an injury producing a scar tissue. But I'm not sure if there's another way to describe collagen deposition in a normal fashion other than fibrosis as well. Probably is fibrogenesis or something like that, or collagenesis.
Well, it's sort of just a normal
Collagenesis?
production. Yeah.
Yeah. Is it collagenesis? Is that a word? I believe it is.
I guess,
All right.
Can you just say collagen deposition?
You could, but there's another word.
Collagenesis would
technical
work,
term
yeah.
for it. Okay.
Yeah, and there's
Fair enough.
and sometimes my mind at this hour does not remember words I
Friday
should.
afternoons.
Yeah.
In particular.
But
Yes.
collagen synthesis of any sort. So the fibrosis thing just kind of got me off on a rabbit trail there. But regardless, what people probably don't realize when it comes to how we market the word collagen is that from our very inception, we're producing collagen all the time. And a lot of it is because we are in a world where we're constantly being injured. We have, radiation, we have cuts and bruises, we have, ionizing, well, that's radiation. And so these things cause damage to our tissues and our body has to repair them. So we're constantly remodeling ourselves. And when we're younger, we have just the ability to do it better. That's just like we were talking about with the tissue engineering that I did as a grad student, or as a postdoc, is that we are able to, when we're younger, just do it faster and better. And as we age, we just can't catch up. We can't keep up with it. And that's why we start to see the signs of aging, because we're accumulating damage and our body is trying to catch up. And so it's going to prioritize. And it's like I've said in other lectures that, if you injure the body with put a hole in it or something, it's going to fix it. But if it doesn't see anything leaking out or leaking in, it's probably not going to prioritize that and say, it's okay, I'll just leave it as is, So injuries can expedite collagen deposition as well as other things, tissue formation, tissue remodeling. And so collagen is just a part of that. And that's one of the things that I want us to focus on, is that it's not as simple as more collagen equals better, that any particular collagen is the key to eternal youth. And so it all is intertwined. And so when we talk about the remodeling process, we do know there's several collagens involved. Mm-hmm. And so you've all heard this kind of cascade and all that. So, I guess, Angela, what is your understanding of tissue remodeling and which collagens are good, which collagens are bad, or is that a thing?
Well, again, this is going to go back to my industry knowledge and in particular the devices that we work with. And so I think of tissue remodeling as creating injury to remodel the skin, which includes deposition of collagen. And depending on the level of inflammation involved in that process depends on the type of collagen or the structure, I should say, of the collagen. Because I think it all, in my mind, it's all collagen. Starts out in the wound healing cascade. It starts out as collagen 3 and then progresses upon remodeling to collagen 1. But then the structure of that collagen can be very different depending on, according to my knowledge, according to the inflammation that was involved in that process. So if it was an inflammatory process, it could be more of a scar tissue type formation, which the collagen would then be more of a parallel format. If it was non-inflammatory, then it would be more prone to a natural form of collagen, which would look more like a basket weave form of collagen.
Okay.
So, that's just my knowledge in terms of working with the devices that we've worked with over the years of tissue remodeling. And I'm sure there's a lot more than that, but that's my
Sure.
limited knowledge.
Okay, and Brian, what's your reaction to that kind of?
Well, it's pretty good. I mean, when you think about it, as far as for scars, if it's something that's very traumatic to the body, it's wanting to repair that very quickly. It produces a lot of collagen, throws it down there trying to protect the body and protect that particular tissue. What you're talking about is trying to do it such that you're getting a increase in activity without it actually being a stress response or a strong stress response to an injury that needs to be repaired very quickly and somewhat haphazardly. And so what you're trying to do is get that response towards collagen 3 and moving towards collagen 1. So, but the other thing I think needs to be remembered is that collagen has a very long half-life, and that, if you look at collagen that's found in the dermis, I think they talk about it lasting for 14 to 17 years. And so it can pick up a lot of damage, and it doesn't turn over very much. And so I think at least that collagen is produced relatively rare. So when you do start slowing down as towards the production of it, it actually becomes quite noticeable, and that's why you get the aging to occur, is that it's not produced very immensely or intensely as towards, and so what you're trying to do is stimulate that response.
Yeah, and I think also what you said to kind of a person that is kind of a novice in cell biology and such, it's helpful, like to say things like basket weave pattern, lap pattern. But in reality, it's kind of more of a, when it's scar tissue, it's just more disorganized.
Okay.
Where it's more organized in normative tissue, and that just has to do with the nature of what the cell is trying to do when it's recovering from an injury. And the type of injury.
How quickly it needs to respond, according to what Brian just said. It depends on how urgent is the situation, how quickly does it need to respond. In other words, if it can respond more slowly, then it can organize better. And then how traumatic the event was, how much damage is there.
That's right.
That forces the body to respond very quickly and, again, create something that's more disorganized.
Right, but it's also the environment,
Yeah.
what the environment of the tissue is at the time of the restructuring. And so we know that in certain animals, they don't, fibrosis in the scar tissue doesn't really happen because of the way that their body reacts to the injury, similar to fetal tissue. We've talked about that in the past. And so we don't want to get too bogged down in remodeling today, because we did talk about that previously. But as far as collagen's concerned, when you talk about the structure of the collagen and such, it's really the way in which the body's laying it down and using it. It's not there's no necessarily bad or good collagen. It's more about how the body is using those molecules, and then how the body is reacting to those molecules long term. And so, what's the other part of what you wanted to cover on that?
Well, I think that what are we doing on a daily basis? We talked about injury. I think everybody gets trauma. And we touched on a little bit about some of the aesthetic procedures that are done that trigger less trauma, or that produce, that have less trauma, but still produce a beneficial effect on collagen. But what are just the general public in daily life? What are some of the things that consumers are doing on a daily basis that are degrading collagen in the body?
I think you might have one of them in your mind. So why don't you just tell us which one you're thinking
Well,
of?
we kind of touched on sugar. Sugar's one of them.
Which you told us not to talk about.
Yeah, but we need to kind of talk about it.
All
Excess sugar intake. That's one of them, right? So in what way does sugar or excess sugar degrade collagen? What's happening in that case?
Okay, well, I don't know if you want to call it degrading. Essentially what it does is it cross-links that collagen, so it no longer is movable or flexible.
Supple.
supple.
Yep.
And so it actually, if you think about a swinging bridge, that needs to move back and forth because of the movement of the earth or whatever the case may be. Now you're making it rigid, then it tends to make it break or not have a real function anymore. And so that's what really happens with large amounts of sugar. It's called a advanced glycation end products, or browning reaction, I think is the other term for it. It's the same reaction that occurs when you brown a chicken or a turkey. It's towards that skin. It turns kind of a yellowish brown. And that's what actually happens to your collagen within your skin.
Well, that's not a nice thought, Brian.
Okay,
Well-
well I was trying to bring a little Thanksgiving thought to it.
It's a little early.
okay.
So you talked about there being 28 different types of collagen. So does sugar affect some forms of the collagen? Because you talked about some collagen is just weighing the skin down to the bones. That sounds like
It
more when
does.
you're talking about keeping a bridge. Now suddenly my tendons aren't working as well as they could have because I was an excessive sugar intaker over the years.
Sugar intaker.
Is that the case, or
Well-
does it affect all? Does excess sugar affect all 28 types of collagen?
To some extent,
equally?
they will, but more so than others. So,
Okay.
But again, the other part that's bad about the sugars is that with that cross-linking, it no longer can be broken down or broken down easily by, we've talked about before, matrix metalloproteinases or MMPs, and that's necessary to get them to be removed so that they can put new and more functional collagen fibers in the place of old fibers, and so. That's
Okay, so does not allow, when it gets to that point and it's no longer pliable or supple,
Right.
the collagen is not as easily broken down by the body when it's supposed to be broken down
Right.
and degraded and moved on, so that I won't say fresh new collagen, but I will say healthy collagen can be added, correct?
Yeah, and there's been quite a bit of work on what's called glycation breakers, or what would break those advanced glycation end products. So there's been a number of different treatments for heart attack. You brought up the fact of vessels in the heart, because again, they'll get cross-linked as well in regarding sugar intake.
Become stiff.
And so they're no longer as functional as they used to be and lead towards, insufficiencies regarding the heart and cardiac output. So they're trying to find things that would break those sugar cross-links. And that's also been done in the skin in a number of cases. And that's also some areas in which people are going into for anti-aging benefits or improvement of skin pliability.
Right, and glycation is something very advanced as far as skin issues. It's typically very hard to treat because it's very advanced as far as skin damage. And so when you see something that can help it, it's actually quite a big deal.
So when I think of glycation, if I'm visibly seeing that on the skin, I'm seeing almost like a cross-hatched pattern on the skin,
Yeah.
right? And that is difficult to
That's
treat.
when it's pretty advanced. Yeah.
That's when it's advanced. And is that always caused from sugar, or sugar's a part of that, of what can cause that glycation?
Well, for glycation, I think it is sugar. That's why it's called the
Okay.
glycation.
Okay.
We're not talking only like table sugar, but that's
Right.
why glycation, it comes from like anything is
Yeah.
sugar related. But sugars are a type of
Ribose,
molecule,
glyco-
not
glucose, yeah.
simply glucose from
Yeah.
table sugar.
Okay.
So
But
there's
that gets broken down into individual subcomponents of sugar, and those get cross-linked between the proteins or between the fibers of the protein, and so it essentially builds a lattice structure that they no longer move. And you want to have these proteins to be able to move because you want your skin to be able to move, or your joints to be able to move, or your tendons and the like.
in the way that they're designed to.
Yeah, correct.
So a diabetic is going to have more glycation of the skin than a normal patient because their body's not able to process
Right.
sugar
You
in
can
the
think
same
of it
way.
also like when somebody gets their spine fused and they can't move as much. It's a similar thing. When you fuse certain things together, it just reduces mobility and it changes the way that particular thing functions. So that's one way in which collection of damaged collagen can contribute to aging.
Right.
And when we're younger, we have the ability to just remodel that much easier, much better. And so it's not that we're damaging ourselves necessarily more, it's that we're accumulating the damage over the years, and then we
okay.
just don't have the ability to fix it as we used to. And it gets worse and worse.
Yeah, and diabetics, you start seeing glycation end products or advanced glycation end products in their 20s and early 30s. So they start having rigidity in their tissues much, much earlier than someone's able to maintain their sugar levels. So.
Right. Yes.
Okay, so excess sugar is one of them. UV damage, I think we touched on that a little bit, is a form of trauma that
That's right,
affects
because
collagen or negatively.
and that's through several avenues. You know, it's not just because UV radiation damages one thing in particular. It also causes upregulation of certain things that actually can eat away at these structural proteins.
Right.
And so then there's one that
it also actually decreases the actual production of collagen. So it actually increases the enzyme activity towards degradation, but then also shuts down or greatly reduces the production of collagen.
Right, because they're tied to degradation, not production, so it's going to a feedback loop.
Yeah.
So as you're younger and you're still building collagen at a fast rate, you can actually slow down that process by excessive sun exposure.
Correct. So
there you have it.
So the protein goes down, the production goes down, the degradation goes up, and the damage goes up. So again,
got to explain this to my kids tonight.
Well, there's lots of reasons why.
As they wouldn't wear sunscreen on the beach in Barcelona last week.
Okay. And so one of the things, like for instance, I just handed Brian a paper when we were getting started here. You know, there's a study that talks about UV damage to the sebocytes, which is the oil-producing cells of the oil glands of the skin, or that produce sebum and the different oils and such. And they actually they've actually showed some sort of tie between the UV damage to the sebocytes and changing the things that the sebocyte produces that actually affects the melanocyte and causes melasma, as well as also the fibroblasts, and changes the way the fibroblasts act as well, which are the cells that produce the collagen mostly in the skin. And so again, there's not only direct ways of the way that we can damage collagen, but indirect ways as well through whether it's UV damage or bad diet, which I do want to talk about. Diet and how diet affects the collagen in our body. And then we can get into, because we only have a few minutes left, supplementation of collagen. But collagen in our body through our diet, we have to remember, and this is where I bring it back to what? The microbiome. And so
here we go again. All goes back to the microbiome.
But the thing is, the microbiome does play a large role in the way that we react to our diet. As well as the substances that they secrete they actually have bacteria in our skin and in our gut that secrete or cause our body to secrete collagenase. Yeah. And so collagenase is anything with ace means removal or breaking down. Yeah. So the breaking down of collagen is collagenase. And so that is actually something that if we don't treat the microbes in our body correctly, and that can be that could be our diet or also the skincare that we use, is it can cause certain reactions of the bacteria there to produce things like either hyaluronidase or collagenase. And these things actually play a role in the way that our skin and the rest of our body can actually age. And part of that is when we have diet that causes our gut microbes to secrete inflammatory signals that can also trigger proteins and enzymes in our body to break down collagen and other extracellular matrix proteins. So it's important that we note that it's not just sun damage. It's also diet. And when you talked about sugar and glycation, that's manifested on the skin. That's not the only reason that sugar is bad. Sugar also can cause the fermentation of sugar in our guts can cause inflammatory signals. So can dairy products. It's true.
It's making
cheese.
You never want to eat it again.
Right. Yeah, right. And so, and then the other thing is, we also have to realize that our diet, which now we're going to go into the supplementation, is going to affect genders differently.
Oh boy, here we go. You're looking at me.
Well, this is where,
when
I talk about, skin aging, we do know that a lot of people put a lot of emphasis on how thick the dermis is. And they say, you're going to thicken your dermis by collagen deposition. So you get a filler, they call it a biostimulator. And they say, and my question to them is, do you think that the collagen stimulation is going to happen in the dermis? What's the point of you calling it a collagen stimulator? Because that's not the case. It causes fibrosis. It coats that filler, and that adds to the volumization, possibly a long-term volumization or something, but not necessarily thickening the dermis. And that feeds into even supplementation, is that when we do these things, we know that women, especially after menopause, their skin does reduce in its thickness significantly. In men, it happens over a longer term, but that comes down to when you look at hormones. Right. Men have the same phenomena as women do with hormones. It just takes a lot longer and it tapers a lot better.
Is that epidermis and dermis that both thin out?
Probably mostly dermis, because the epidermis isn't that thick.
Well, actually, more towards the epidermis will become thinner as you become older.
Well, both will.
Well, but the dermis actually, if you look at the lower or the part of the dermis, it actually becomes thicker because it builds up all the collagen, the non-functional collagen. So it actually, if you look at the difference between the papillary and the reticular layer of the dermis, I will grant you that the papillary dermis becomes thinner, but the reticular area of the dermis becomes thicker because it actually has a buildup of collagen, typically collagen that's non-functional.
Okay. Well, we don't have enough time to really go through that too much, but I will tell you that I've done cadaver studies and ultrasound studies that show that women over the age of 50 or 60, I've seen dermis as thin as 0.5 millimeter.
Oh, yeah.
And so while I concede that a lot of it's probably non-functional.
Well, in the papillary dermis, the top part of the dermis, which is usually a little bit thicker, becomes essentially non-existent.
Nothing, yes.
Yeah.
So I just, maybe that's the thing, is that maybe you're just saying that that lower part becomes non-functional and then it just shrinks to nothing.
Right, because the top layer, it doesn't.
But the overall thickness, I've observed in my own research to thin significantly.
Totally agree. It just, if you subdivide it, there's some that get thicker, but the larger section in normal tissue, the papillary dermis, becomes much smaller. And that's what you're seeing.
And for those who don't know jargon, again, papillary is the upper part of the dermis. The reticular would be the lower part.
Right. Well, all I can tell you right now is I want to rush off to the health food store and buy everything that says collagen on it.
Okay, well, that was a
good segue.
I'm going to get the supplements.
Don't stop listening, people, because we're about to blow this out of the water. No, so that's a great segue. Thank you for that, Angela, because we should talk about this, especially in regards to male versus female. And so, Alan, I don't know if you can put my screen up for everybody to see, but for those of you who are listening, I'll describe it. But I saw this in a publication when I was looking at this idea of supplementation of collagen. So basically, this study shows that when you look at the macronutrients that people ingest between men and women, that when you give a huge amount of protein or supplement with protein, the men actually see a significant increase in the dermis as far as thickness. Women do not see any thickening of the dermis. It's actually the carbohydrates that fluctuate the skin thickness of women, and it's because of the fatty tissue, not the dermis.
They need more fat because they lose fat and volume in their face.
Right, and so it's actually
but we're not supposed to be having a lot of carbohydrates. That also puts excess fat in other areas.
That's correct, it does. But that's where you just have to concede that it's not across the board the same, men and women. And so when we talked about the animal models, the hypothetical where you say collagen 3 does this, and so I'm going to go do that too. It may not be the same between men and women. So for a man, he might get a great response, and for women, maybe not as much. Like a man in this particular figure that I was going to show, the high protein males, actually the fatty layer actually shrunk almost to nothing, where the dermis got significantly thicker versus the control or low protein, where low protein, it didn't change anything really. And then the high protein for the females versus the control, it shrunk a little bit of the fatty layer, but the dermis didn't change at all.
So does this mean, in fact, I cannot go to the health store this evening and buy collagen drinks and supplements and expect change in my skin?
Well, this is, again, let's talk about it a little further, because I also read another publication, and I want to hear your guys' response to this, is that they took soy protein, and then they took soy peptides. So again, the protein is the large complete molecule, and the peptides are the broken down ones. And so soy collagen.
Soy collagen?
Oh, now I'm doubting myself because I don't. It was soy protein. But I thought it was collagen, but now I don't think soy produces collagen.
No, they don't.
Anyway, the peptides versus the protein, and they found that the peptide actually produced a lot better effects on the skin than the whole protein.
Now, they denature the whole protein as far as with heat, or is it?
They hydrolyzed it.
Okay.
So what's your thoughts on that? It is just protein.
Well, I know they've done work in looking at skin lightening agents as far as using soy proteins. And again, if it was native soy protein, that means that, again, it still contained the 3D structure. It worked. But if it was actually cooked, then it lost its 3D functionality or structure and lost its functionality.
Yeah, that's you said that was ingesting?
That was actually correct. Yeah, I'm sorry, I had to
because
think about that.
we know that proteins, when they're heated, will lose their structure
Right.
and such. It's called denaturing.
Correct, yeah.
And so you'll do that to get an enzyme, kill an enzyme or whatever. But regardless, yes, if you go to the health food store, it is debatable whether collagen whether it's hydrolyzed, which means it's broken down or can be absorbed easier, or whether it's whole, like in just meats or whatnot, is going to make all that much difference other than just increasing your protein intake. Now, there are some studies that I could not find them for today, but there was one in particular that claimed that when these rats ingested collagen, it actually went and was deposited in the collagenous areas like the joints and the skin and such. I can't find it. I don't know whether it was done by the company that sells that product. So, I'm not saying that's always a bad thing, but it's the only time I've seen it substantiated to that level. In a review article that I read today, more or less, it said there's some evidence that shows that collagen ingestion can add to things like elasticity of skin, but I don't believe it's been substantiated that it's not due to just more intake of protein or a better diet. Because if you're ingesting more liquids and proteins, you're probably not ingesting as much other things because you're going to be satiated and more full. And so these are the things that at this point, I would say, I'm not sure that whole philosophy of if my eye hurts, go get something that's shaped like an eye. If my skin is bad, go eat some skin from animals, which is that kind of Eastern philosophy, ancient Eastern philosophy. Right. If my heart's bad, eat a deer heart.
It sounds like the jury is still out on those types of products.
Right.
Maybe not. Would I be better off just doing what we said we shouldn't be doing, the excessive sugar, the UV damage, if I were a smoker, stopping the smoking,
better diet,
healthier diet? Would I be better off exercised and doing all of those things if I wanted to increase collagen or at least stop the degradation of my own collagen to look and feel younger longer?
Yes.
I'd be better off doing that versus investing
there's nothing wrong
in
with
something.
Having a steak once in a while or whatever, enjoying that part of it. But
moderation.
Yeah,
right?
and frankly,
moderation.
other than hurting your wallet, getting a collagen supplement isn't going to hurt you per se, at least not that we know of. It's just not necessarily going to do anything that's specific to skin that we know of either. Right. Now, that being said, some people swear by them. Great. If you're willing to pay for it, go for it. But I would say I would not myself invest in that. I, again, would invest because for me, the thing that causes aging is not lack of collagen. It's the whole system degrading because of those senescent cells, the genetic, aging and such. And so to address your skin, I would say I'd invest more, and I do, in anti-aging, like senolytic molecules like apigenin and NMN and stuff like that. And we can have a whole other podcast on some of that stuff in the future. But those are the things that are kind of more, in my opinion, the future of anti-aging.
And then the other things that we know, and we'll end on this note, is still there are procedures that you can go in and have, such as the ones that our devices create, that can help to increase collagen deposition, correct? And patients could still be investing in those, and topical agents and microbiome care, for instance. There's still other things that you could be doing that have shown some success in collagen, correct?
Yes, correct. And I'm not saying you can't do anything. I'm just saying that I would not invest in collagen drinks and such. I would invest in things that legitimately are shown to kind of move the needle holistically. And there's going to always be a little bit of, we're learning more so we can do better. And we'll probably change stances every, so often because we know more at that point. And so for right now, I agree with you. There are things that you can do. We have to concede that some things actually mask aging, while other things actually are are going to de-age.
Reverse.
Yeah,
aging.
reverse aging. And those things are very few and far between right now and limited, but we're getting there.
Well,
And
that is
so-
encouraging.
Yeah, and that's where we have to stop it
Okay.
here.
Let's-
So
Could talk about that all day.
we can. And so thank you very much, everybody, for your eyes and ears. We hope you learned something. And you can reach us on the Crown website at crownlaboratories.com. Or if you want to reach me personally, go on to my Instagram at dr.t.hitchcock. And you can communicate with me there. We will see you next time. Bye.
Thank you.